From a young age, all we hear is that we should be kind to one another, and that violence is never the answer. Yet sometimes people simply snap and do things they'll later regret. Sometimes those actions can even cost them their freedom. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to look at the unbelievable story of how a Zoom call exposed a 15-year-old murder. If you're new here, make sure to stay tuned for more content like this. Let's jump right into it. It was a typical day at school for 15-year-old Anthony Temple. Just another day in the life of an ordinary high school student. But what Anthony didn't know was that this day would end in disaster. Not for him, but for his friend, Bradley. As the two friends were about to find out, sometimes friendship could mean the difference between living a happy life or spending the rest of your days behind bars. When the school day finally ended, Anthony and Bradley decided to continue hanging out at a local park near Anthony's home. They sat down on some nearby swings and began talking. They talked about girls, school, and other things teenagers love to talk about, until suddenly Anthony brought up something he'd been meaning to discuss with Bradley. The two friends had been friends since childhood, so there was no awkwardness between them. Anthony opened up to Bradley about some of the bullying he'd been facing lately from another group of students. Anthony told Bradley about how annoyed he'd become of these students' constant taunts and jabs. He said he wanted to confront them, but Bradley advised against it, telling his friend that fighting would only make things worse. Anthony, though, had already made up his mind. In fact, he'd already come up with a plan to teach his bullies a lesson they wouldn't forget. And now he was going to tell his best friend what that plan was. What happened next was one of the biggest mistakes young Anthony could have ever made. You see, after Anthony told Bradley his plan, which involved harming both himself and his bullies, Bradley decided to go along with it. Bradley might have actually believed he was helping his friend out by doing this, but that couldn't be further from the truth. What Bradley did next would result in him being tried as an adult. The boys went to Anthony's house, where Anthony's mother wasn't home at the time. After getting inside, the two friends went to Anthony's bedroom. While there, Anthony took out a knife and showed it to Bradley. Anthony then pulled up a chair, sat down, and told Bradley to get on a Zoom call with Anthony's bullies. Bradley knew what was going on at that moment. Anthony planned to harm himself in front of his bullies over Zoom. Bradley logged onto the call, inviting Anthony's bullies into the chat. When they arrived, Bradley told them Anthony wanted to speak with them. Then he left the room to give Anthony some time alone with the others. We can only imagine what Bradley was thinking at this point. It must have been a terrifying experience for him, seeing firsthand what his friend was about to do. Meanwhile, on the other side of the screen, Anthony's bullies had no idea what they had just walked into. All they saw was a random person sitting in a chair. What they were about to witness would change their lives forever. Bradley came back into the room and saw that Anthony had taken the knife and begun cutting his own skin. Everyone on the call was shocked and confused. No one had expected this. But Anthony continued cutting himself, smiling at the camera as he did it. This was part of his plan. He wanted his bullies to see how far he was willing to go to defend himself. In the background, Bradley could hear Anthony humming a song as he cut himself deeper and deeper. At some point, Anthony stopped and looked directly at the camera. He mouthed the words, "I dare you," to whoever was on the other side of the screen before continuing to cut himself. But who exactly was watching? And like Anthony, he had access to a phone with a camera. However, unlike Anthony, Davion didn't want to harm himself. So instead, he decided to do the unthinkable. He grabbed a gun and fired 3 shots at the camera. On the other side of the screen, Bradley witnessed the entire event, screaming at Davion to stop, but it was too late. One of the bullets had already hit Anthony right in the head. Anthony collapsed onto the floor before Bradley could even react. Bradley screamed for help as Anthony's blood covered the floor and the walls. It was obvious that Anthony was dead. Bradley immediately called 911 and tried to perform first aid. By the time emergency services arrived, Anthony was already gone. Meanwhile, Davion dropped the gun and fled the scene. Bradley was taken into custody as police searched for Davion. When they finally caught up with him, Davion confessed everything to the police. He told them that he had seen Anthony cutting himself on the Zoom call and panicked. He thought that Anthony was trying to hurt himself, so he shot him to stop him. Of course, this wasn't true, but Davion genuinely believed it. When Bradley's parents found out what he had done, they immediately took him to a therapist. They knew that Bradley had done the right thing by calling 911, but they also needed to help him cope with the trauma he experienced that night. Bradley felt terrible about what happened to Anthony. He didn't want to live with the guilt of that day forever, though. So when given the opportunity, he testified against Davion in court, telling the judge that Davion was the one who initiated the Zoom call. However, many people still believe that Davion's sentence was unfair. Some say Bradley is just as guilty as Davion because he was the one who allowed Davion onto the Zoom call in the first place. However, Bradley's lawyer argued that Bradley was only trying to help Anthony and that he should be commended for calling 911 rather than sentenced for helping Anthony take his own life. Still, the judge saw fit to try Bradley as an adult due to the severity of the crime. But the question remains, why did Bradley decide to help Anthony in the first place? Bradley's family has remained silent throughout the trial and in the months leading up to it. They haven't spoken publicly about what happened or why their son decided to take such drastic measures. However, Anthony's family spoke out after Davion's sentencing. They said that they understood why Davion was angry at Anthony's behavior on the call, but that they couldn't understand why Bradley allowed Davion to join the call in the first place. They said that neither Bradley nor Davion had any idea how distraught Anthony's family was over his death, saying that they felt like Bradley and Davion didn't care about Anthony's feelings at all. While Davion faces 15 years in prison, Bradley likely won't see the outside of a jail cell for much longer. He's currently serving a 10-year sentence. But the question remains, what would you have done if you were in Bradley's shoes? Let us know your thoughts below. And that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. And please remember to stay tuned for more content like this. We hope you learned something new and gained some insight into the events that transpired between Bradley and Anthony. We'd also like to thank you all for the support you've given us. We're so grateful to have you all in our community. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.